Tonight, we're going to move on to the next Parsha after Pinchas, which is Matot. And we're going to begin this evening's session with chapter 32, a very little understood chapter, and yet for us today it has an important significance. While as you read this section by and within itself, it seems to have little reference or a little relationships to our lives today. I'm referring now to the section which deals with the plea of Reuven and God and half of the tribe of Menashe that had suddenly raised a question to Moses. And I read as follows, verse number 1. Now the children of Reuben and the children of Gad had a very great multitude of cattle. For whatever reason, they must have been good shepherds, and they knew how to create a large flock of cattle. And so they had very much, says the Bible. And when they saw the land of Yazer and the land of Gilead, they felt that this was the place for cattle. And so in verse 2 it says, and they came to Moshe and Elazar HaKohen, and all of the princes of the congregation, and said, this land is very good for us, meaning for the cattle. And in verse 5, they then plead, if we have found favor in thy sight, let this land be given unto thy servants for a possession. Bring us not over the Jordan. Now we're talking about the 12 tribes of Jacob, who were promised by Abraham that they would inherit the land of Israel. And now along come Reuven, at this point, Reuven and Gad, and said, we would rather remain on the other side of the Jordan. When I say the other side of the Jordan, meaning the eastern side of the Jordan, which is today known as Jordan. And suddenly feeling that the land of Israel that was promised to them, and obviously Moses was not in the land of Israel, because he was in the land of Jordan. And as we have learned on many occasions, that Moses, because he had struck the stone rather than spoken to the stone, therefore, I'd rather prefer not saying he was punished, but because of that very minor act in which he disobeyed the commandment of the Lord, when the Lord said, talk to the stone when the Jews didn't have any water, and he smote the stone, and out came water, and for that reason, God had told Moses that he would not enter the land of Israel. And so here he is together with these two tribes, and also later the half-tribe of Menashe, and they're pleading that they do not enter the land of Israel. Very strange. Not only for the fact that we're discussing now the people of the Exodus, the people with the highest form of intelligence that ever existed, and they were fully aware of the fact that the land of Israel was something special. I think it was something special, if that's what God promised Abraham, and that all of his subsequent children and children's children would inherit the land of Israel. And now they're begging Moses to please permit them to settle outside the area of what is known as Israel. And what does Moses reply in verse 6? Shall your brethren go to war and you shall sit here? Not fair. Just because you are here already, and you know that the other brethren, meaning the other tribes, want to capture the land of Israel, so it simply isn't fair that you remain here and they go to war by themselves. And wherefore will we turn away the heart of the children of Israel from going over into the land which the Lord hath given them? And then he goes on to a discourse of repeating that, you remember when they sent spies to the land of Israel, and they came back with the bad report, and all of you were told that you would never enter the land of Israel. I don't know why he's repeating this again to them. I mean, they're more than happy to remain right there on the other side of the Jordan. But before he responds, he first began off with a criticism. And then he says, you remember when your fathers went to explore and spy out the land? And then in verse 10 it says, and the Lord's anger was kindled that day. And he said, in verse 11, repeats it, surely none of the men that came out of Egypt from 20 years old and upward shall see the land which I swore unto Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because they did not follow him. Outside of Caleb ben Yefuneh and Yehoshua. And he keeps going on with this idea. And ultimately, he extracts a promise. He extracts a promise from the two tribes, that they shall assist their brethren in verse 17, but we ourselves will be armed, ready to go before the children of Israel until we have brought them unto their place. And our little ones shall dwell in the fortified cities because of the inhabitants of the land, but because we are leaving our children here and our wives and our cattle, we shall fortify the areas, and then we shall return to this side of the Jordan only after Israel shall capture and inherit the land. And in verse 20, if you do this thing, if you arm yourselves to go to war, and every armed man of you will pass over the Jordan until he has driven out his enemies, then you can return and remain here. And this land shall be your possession. And this is a complete section of verse 32 in Numbers. And I don't want to go into the detail because we could probably spend another year, because there is so much that is so misunderstood, but that is unintelligible or incomprehensible. But in any event, we'll just dwell on this part. There's much repetition that keeps going on, and when you have a chance to review chapter 32 in Numbers. We have already discussed what the land of Israel meant and why it's called the land of Israel. But I think we also should raise several other questions now that we understand what the land of Israel means. Yet we see that some of the Israelites who were reborn with this new desire to receive on Mount Sinai somehow did not feel that they wanted to participate in the inhabitant of the land of Israel. This land was promised back in chapter 12 to Abraham. That he told him that this land shall be your land. Now it was called, the land of Canaan. It had another name. And then after the Israelites settled in that land, it was then called the land of Israel. Are we to assume that the reason it was called Canaan and not some other name, or not the land of Israel, because the Israelites did not yet settle there? But Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were promised this land, already had inherited that land. They lived there. In fact, I would like to quote an interesting commentary of Rashi, and we'll get back to Kabbalah, but nevertheless, Rashi quotes on many occasions the Zohar. But in chapter 12, verse 5, it says, and Abraham, well, at that time he wasn't called Abraham, Abram took his wife Sarah and Lot, his nephew, and all that they possessed, and they went to the land of Canaan, Vayavo Arza Canaan, and they came there. And in verse 6, it says that he came until Shechem, which is Nablus, and it says, V'haknani az ba'aretz, and the Canaanite was then in the land. So Rashi makes an observation that this land actually was divided, this land, in other words, after the flood, says Rashi, the portion of Israel, that we know is Israel, was divided by Noah to his 3 sons, but this portion was given to the son Shem. For those of you not familiar with the descendants of Shem, but that is the nation of Israel. Nation of Israel descended from Shem. And Noah, I guess through vision, understood that ultimately this land would belong to the children of Israel, and therefore he portioned out that this particular section for the children, for Shem. And then he says about the aspect Vaknani az ba'aretz, haya holeh v'koveshet eretz Yisrael mishazaru shel Shem. Along came this nation called Canaan, and they captured the land of Israel. And therefore, when Abraham visited that country, he came to the land of Israel, which was then known as Canaan. The Rashi says that Vaknani az ba'aretz, he wants to inform us that rightfully this belonged to the descendants of Shem, but the people of Canaan captured this land, and therefore, once they captured that country, it no longer was known as the land of Shem or the land of Israel, but now it turned into another name, Haknani az ba'aretz. And the Bible specifies it that he went to Arza Canaan. Now, why should it say he went to the land of Canaan? He went to Israel. The fact that it was captured by people who weren't deserving of this land, why does the Torah have to go along with the fact that it was, let's say, illegally captured? And therefore, and further, the Torah says, V'haknani az ba'aretz, as if it wasn't enough that it's Israel. He says, no, you should know the ones who inhabited that land were the Canaanites. In addition, we want to raise another question. When Abraham was promised that the land of Israel would belong to his descendants, he was also told that the Israelites would have to first go down to Egypt in exile, and then when they came out of Egypt, they would then inherit the land of Israel. Now, what was the purpose of going through that kind of trip? If he promised them the land, why would he then have to say that they would have to be in exile, and after they came out of exile, then they are going to inherit the land? Let them inherit the land immediately. In fact, why send Jacob and his sons down to Egypt, which is the beginning of the book of Exodus, telling us a story? And in fact, that's why Joseph became second in command to Pharaoh, so that the Jews would come because he is already there. But why did we need this? It would make a good movie maybe, but I mean, the Bible wasn't written just for biblical movies, although despite the fact that they might be very interesting. But why all of this trip? In addition, that we are told that there were 7 nations that ultimately David would control and capture. 7 nations that inherited that land. Why 7? We could say, 7. But why? What was all that? Why was all that necessary? By going into the, in addition, just for your information, the Talmud says, in fact, that is a reason that is also by legend considered to be the reason for Chaim Vital, who produced the Kitvei Ari, went to Damascus, because it says that when the Messiah finally arrives, Jerusalem will be mitpashet until Damascus. In other words, the city called Jerusalem will extend up until Damascus. Up until Damascus. That means, and Damascus is on the other side of the Jordan. Right? If you know your geography, we do know that Syria lies on the other side of the Jordan. Jordan flows down, which is now presently in the land of Israel, but Damascus is not part of Israel. Yet the Jordan is in full control at that point. In other words, further up you have Lebanon, but at the point where Damascus is, that's just 25 miles away from the border of Israel, present border of Israel. Anyway, to answer this question concerning God and the children of Reuven and the half a tribe of Menashe, why didn't they go into the land of Israel? In other words, we know immediately that when the Bible is telling us a story that they're coming with cattle and it's good grazing land and they don't want to go into the land of Israel, the Bible is telling us something of a kind of code. It's not just merely a story. And so immediately, the Ari, in his Sefer Lekutim, immediately provides us with the answer. And that will provide us with a greater insight into all of what this is about concerning the land of Israel. He says, Sod b'nei Gad u'b'nei Ruvain, and I read in Hebrew, as you know, we always read the words of Kabbalah in Hebrew, because that in its very essence of reading expands our awareness and our consciousness. Sod b'nei Gad b'nei Ruvain v'chetzi shevet ha'menashe lo nichnasa la'aretz. What was the secret why they didn't go in? He says, Sod inyan, and the The secret of the matter is as follows. Ki Yaakov Avinu kishemizdavek im Leah haya savu shehaya Rachel. If you remember the story of the marriage of Jacob with Leah, for those of you who would like to refer back to the story is when Jacob left, and that's in Genesis, left Israel. He ran away supposedly from Esau after he had taken away the first birthright blessing from Esau, and he ran away, and he ran to Laban where he met Rachel and Leah, and that's in chapter 28, for those of you who would like to pursue it. And Jacob worked 7 years because he loved Rachel, and Laban figured he could get extract more work out of him, fooled him, and gave him Leah instead. And but anyway, Jacob, when he was mizdavekim Leah, when he was celebrating his night, his marriage night, and we've already gone into the aspect of how come he didn't know it was not Rachel, all right? And many customs have arisen from that on the night of the wedding, the bridegroom should meet the bride again just before the wedding to be certain that there's been no exchange here. All of this originates from Jacob, and of course you have to understand we're talking about Jacob, who was a chariot, and while Rashi, who quotes the Midrash, says that how could Jacob have been fooled? But Jacob was a wise man, and he suspected that Laban would try some kind of a trick of this sort. Gave Rachel certain codes, and so the night of the wedding, he would present her with certain questions, and if she knew the answers, he then knew that it would be Rachel, right? But and then Laban said no to Rachel. No, he's going to marry Leah, because nobody's going to marry a younger daughter before the older daughter, and therefore Rachel gave away the secrets to Leah, and therefore Jacob didn't know that it was Rachel. We'll accept that this is on a very superficial level. This is what happened. But in any event, how this happened, it did happen. He married Leah, but he did think Rachel, but he was under the impression that it was Rachel. V'nishmato shel Ruvain aita misod hadat. You remember who the firstborn was? Reuben, right? He was the firstborn. And because this was the firstborn, and without going in one of these days, one of these evenings, we shall discuss the aspect of firstborn, the pidyon rabben, and etc. But in any event, this was the firstborn. There is a particular power in the firstborn, and because Yaakov Shalomidat, it was without his knowing. So why, in other words, the story that we just read about Reuben coming to Moses and saying, don't want to go into Israel, the cattle, grazing of the cattle in the other side of Jordan is much better. We would, if we just simply were fundamentalists without looking for a deeper meaning of the Bible, we would just say that's what happened. But obviously we know that the Bible is a cosmic code, and when Reuben said he didn't want to go into Israel, it was not a decision because of his cattle that he wasn't entering the land of Israel, but because he couldn't get into the land of Israel. This was not the land that was reconcilable with Reuben at this point. And therefore, as we learned that the land of Israel, when they were all standing on Mount Sinai, there was a rebirth, and that the land of Israel is the energy center at that time, since it was not done with his knowing, and we'll get back to this, what it means, but in any event, we're getting the impression from the Ari that the reason that Reuben did not enter the land of Israel was not because he decided this was a good place for his cattle, but because the energy intelligence that came into Reuben, because of the situation of Yaakov thinking it was Rachel and not Leah, and because it was Leah, and because Reuben was born from that kind of zivug, that kind of intercourse situation, therefore he could not enter the land of Israel. We shall return to it, but this is the reason why Reuben did not enter, not because of the cattle. Then we might ask other questions. Why does the Torah have to give us the impression like it was purely an economic reason, rather than, how much does the Bible or Revelations, called Revelation on Mount Sinai, the more we're studying the Bible, the more we learn about Revelation, the more we learn how much concealed it is. Rather than not tell us, just tell us Reuben was not fit to enter the land of Israel. No, he's got to tell us he had it for an economic reason.
Might have a good reason. I've been thinking now. It could be a joke, but it could be serious too. If Moses had a discussion with the Lord, we would say, forget those people down here at the Erev Rav that wanted to convert and become Jews, so they come to Israel. So maybe the Lord thought, if I'll give something that would be too good, are people going to read and say, okay, I want to become Jewish too, and not by choice, by reading, So therefore, if he sends something that is decoded by, and the first cover of it's kind of ugly and disgusting, nobody would want it.
We might say that. We could say that. But it seems that the cattle had something to do with it, right? He could have coded it many other ways. But in other words, they have a justification. They had a justification. But they did know that the land of Israel was the energy center of the world. That's why there was revelation on Mount Sinai. Why? What was the reason why that revelation took place? The revelation meant that now the world of metaphysics that was generally concealed to the entire world would now become for the Israelites not a world of metaphysics, but that metaphysics would be, as it says in the Torah, they saw the voices. Do you remember? They saw the voices on Mount Sinai. At Revelation, they saw the voices. What did that mean? That the world of metaphysics, which to us metaphysics means anything beyond the five senses. If you can't touch it, see it, feel it, that refers to the world of metaphysics. The Israelites on Mount Sinai at that time, for them the world of metaphysics and the world of physics was one and the same. And because that happened to them, because of this transformation of the Israelite, he then realized that the place where he could draw directly the energy, the force of metaphysics, would be the land of Israel. So the Ari says they couldn't enter. Reuven could not enter. So just say he couldn't enter. Why the story of the cattle? As if there's an economic reason. All right? We'll come back to that. But in any event, at least we know that it wasn't something on a purely physical basis, because it could not reconcile itself with the fact that they were promised this land belonged to them. Ubnei Gad, Gam came. And the children of God also could not enter the land of Israel. Lefisha Gad haya Gam came below Dat Yaakov. It was also without his willingness. Dat means his consciousness. If you remember the story, in Genesis 30. Genesis 30. As it says, Bana el Shivchati. In Genesis 30, I'll read that. When Rachel saw that she could not have any children at that time, she then came and said, in other words, with permission, she came to Jacob and she said, would you take my handmaid? I just want to just give you the exact verse. And so we don't have to spend time on it. Chapter 30, verse 1. And when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, and Rachel envied her sister, she said, in other words, she asked Jacob for permission if she can give her handmaiden. So in other words, with that handmaiden, it was with permission, it was with da'at, and therefore everything was fine. However, Leah, kishinatna shivchata zilpa liYakov, haya below the shut. She did not ask for permission. Again, there was no consciousness. And we have discussed on other occasions the importance of consciousness. We learned in so far as, for those of you who haven't taken the reincarnation course, the Bible calls Ruvain the Bchor, the firstborn, and also in Deuteronomy it calls Joseph the firstborn. And so the Zohar and the Ari raised the question, how could there be two firstborns of Jacob? Either or. And the answer is that because Jacob had his consciousness, his thought, energy, intelligence, that he was having intercourse with Rachel and not Leah, therefore his internal energy force that became manifested by his sperm remained in animated suspension. Without going into details, this is a wild kind of revelation. And therefore, when did it become manifest? It became manifest when he had intercourse and bore Joseph. And therefore, Joseph is the rightful firstborn. How could this be? He had intercourse with Leah, and yet his consciousness could remain in an animated suspension. And the answer is, as for those of you who have taken this course in reincarnation, that the power that becomes manifest, the thought consciousness that becomes manifest during intercourse, and a child is conceived of that intercourse. In other words, the importance of what thoughts are at the time of conception. The importance and the significance and the influence of thinking, because throughout Rabbi Isaac Luria's Gates of Reincarnation, and from a very practical experience, whenever I have encountered parents with children, you could almost relate the problem of the child to the night these parents had intercourse and conceived that particular child. In other words, the fact that Jacob thought that it was Rachel, and that's where his consciousness was directed, that he directed the internal energy intelligence of that sperm. You say, then how was Reuven born? How was he born? That physical aspect did become manifest but the internal energy intelligence did not become manifest. And therefore, when the Ari says that he was born beli da'at, now you know what it means. He was born without that. In other words, he had been created with a particular body that could handle core, that could handle the power of the firstborn, but the power of the firstborn was lacking. The power of the firstborn was not there. That remained in animated suspension and was subsequently passed on to whom? To Joseph. Now remember this, it's very important for how we understand the half a tribe of Menashe. It's mind-boggling the way the Ari will answer for us. Why only half the tribe of Menashe? You mean only half that tribe were economists and could understand financial matters? If we said the entire Reuben and Gad, okay, they were money-crazed people maybe, right? And they felt their fortune rested with the land in Jordan. Menashe, it says in the Torah, only half the tribe. What do you mean half the tribe? Which half? You mean those who were economists decided yes to remain in Jordan and those not? Why half? What an incredible result. Right down the line, half decided yes, and half decided no. Could that really be something? You may have a tribe of 65,000 people, or let's say 70,000 people, and 3,750, right? 37,500 people decided that their future rests in the land of Israel, and half of that tribe, 37,500, said no. Our future is with Jordan. Where was the logic? But this is what the Bible tells us.
Menashe was also firstborn.
What's that?
And
Menashe was the firstborn of Joseph, you mean? Okay, well, we're getting onto it. All right.
Reuben then was not drawing any energy from Jacob.
That's the energy of Kor.
Not even the energy of Son, because really the energy intelligence of his sperm didn't connect with Reuben. It was a suspended animation.
But nevertheless, on a physical basis, a manifestation took place. That's what I said. The internal energy, thought, intelligence of Jacob did not become manifest within Reuben.
So for somebody like him, the precept of honoring your father still take hold?
Yes. Okay, so we have to get into another lecture of reincarnation, but let me just give you the answer. The answer is yes.
In other words, he still was drawing from
That's right. Therefore, well, while you touch on that, I guess I should give you that piece of information. and with that, now I was just going to say it was not by chance that Eitan asked that question. Now it might be a little embarrassing because I already prefaced my remark to what was just said. But many a time there are people who did not have the best of relationships with their father. It happens. On certain occasions, or on maybe many occasions. And there are some times where we read in the newspapers that a son killed his father.
It just happened. It's always happened before.
Yeah, so it does really happen. Now the question then, so that's the extreme. But in any event, let us remain with the situation where just the child was not on the best terms with the parents, and they come and say, "Do I have to say Kaddish?" I mean, not because he hasn't got the time, or not because he doesn't want to assist his father. He said, but if this is a prayer, then I think a prayer should be done with good conscience, with an honest conscience. And right now, I still feel this animosity to my father or my mother, and so should I say the Kaddish? And the Ari in his Gates of Reincarnation, when he discusses on how you can tell what the thoughts of the parents were at the time of intercourse and conception, which sounds way out, right? You imagine? You look at a 20-year-old child and you know what they thought about at the night they bore this child, right? Gets a little scary too at the same time. And the Ari says that there are times when it's obvious that the parents were not with good intentions having this intercourse situation. But nevertheless, and then he goes into the aspect, if the child now understands, he read the Ari's Gates of Reincarnation, understands fully what happened at the night he was conceived, does he have to now honor his father and mother? And the answer was yes, because while the spiritual aspect of the sperm, obviously spiritual meaning all of the good attributes, the beneficial attributes that are also contained in that sperm, obviously did not transfer to the child because they were both conspiring to rob a bank. Is it conceivable that they could be thinking about things of that nature, or something even more dramatic, something even more disastrous, and yet still having the pleasure of intercourse? No contradiction. And from that kind of mental consciousness was conceived this kind of a child. And he knows it, right? But the Ari says, but this child is now alive, was born for a purpose of tikkun, and had this man and woman not conceived the physical body of this child, the soul of this child then would not have the place by which it could achieve its tikkun. And so, despite whatever else it could not get from its mother and father, that child, nevertheless, the one important aspect, that is, of having a place where it can rest, and maybe that's what this particular child needed at that moment, because maybe he himself in a prior incarnation wasn't of the most righteous people at that, living in that age, and therefore he had to come back into this kind of situation and condition. Therefore, that situation, the body aspect, the body which would now incorporate that kind of soul, was created by virtue of these two people. And therefore he would forever have to honor his mother and father. So that answers your question. But nevertheless, because Jacob did not have dat, he was unaware of it, therefore that aspect of the consciousness of Jacob did not become manifest, and therefore Reuven was dealing with cattle. And we shall shortly understand why cattle. Maybe he had a good hosiery line. Maybe he had a good, dress line, or gloves, whatever, Jack. What else? Huh? Textiles. All right, that's it, yeah. But why cattle? Or neckties? I don't want to leave neckties. You can all put in a plug for your product. What? Jack. Yeah, I figured it was Jack's turn.
How can you not know who he was having intercourse with after the wedding?
Right. Right. It was too late. But I think Jack is asking. Well,
after the wedding, it's too late. He already did.
Oh, you mean after the wedding? How come he didn't know? Oh, then he found out.
It was too late.
But it was too late already.
So why did he have
Jacob,
intercourse?
what?
So why did
Oh no! As he was about to have intercourse is when he was querying for the codes. You mean why didn't he take a good look at her? It was dark. This is all. Again, I'm repeating Medrash and I'm repeating Rashi and so forth. But I know you're asking me for something more than
It
that.
was dark for Jacob.
What's that? It was dark for Jacob. Right, Jacob couldn't see the chariot, right? The man who metaphysics and physics were one and the same thing, but he couldn't see in a dark room.
The face.
Right.
Actually, the starting sits there and are warning every group. When he gets married, they call him la 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 la.
Yes.
They all shout like la la la. Is that what I do that?
Yes? Beautiful. Remember.
It's not Rachel.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so they're warning him. Be careful who is he getting married with.
Or they're even telling him it's Leah, or they're warning him. I can't understand. They were telling him this is the wrong one? Really? Really? Is that where it originated? That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Right. Beautiful. Right. Avi, did you know that's where it came from? Oh, David told you.
Yeah, but I'm not so sure.
He's not
the
smart.
Muslims do it, and the
That doesn't mean anything. Right? Right?
Even the Muslims.
Right.
Well, I also heard that the reason for that is to remove the evil spirit.
I know we've just made a couple of statements which arouse a little excitement one at a time. Go ahead.
I also heard they did that because to remove the evil spirits.
Who said that?
Muslim, I think.
Oh, I see what you mean.
So
All
I don't
right.
know which is true.
But anyway, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. All right. And in any event, Jack's question still remained. I mean, how come he didn't know, right? We're talking about Jacob. All right, but that's not what we want to discuss. Everyone attests to the fact that that he did not know, and therefore was shalom mida'at, and therefore his da'at, and we know the consciousness, incidentally, again, I don't want to dwell on the subject of conception, but nevertheless, where does we assume that every sperm has a consciousness buy-in within itself. The answer is that it obviously, and even physicists today think they have a term for it, transspermia. See, it comes from outer space somewhere. Yeah, transspermia, a new word, right? It helps him along by giving an answer to what we don't understand anyway. So now we have a word that says now we understand, right? It comes from nowhere, now it's all clear. Right?
Very scientific.
Isn't it? Right? The word. I mean, that itself requires a lot of doubt, a lot of intelligence. But in any event, we know that the sperm, which is in a potential state, the potential physical state, does not receive, or shall I say, is not activated until the point of da'at, until that person becomes conscious of the fact that he wants to, or that he is having or an ejaculation, meaning, or that he's at the time having intercourse, and therefore that da'at is what initiates the internal energy, thought, intelligence of the sperm. This is what the Zohar says. All right? Just not to leave Jack's question aside, how come Jacob did not know?
My name is Jacob.
It was not the first time with him. It was not the only time with him.
What?
Jacob also a few times it was taken away from him. With Yosef.
That's right. That's the answer. That's the answer. The same way as we can raise the question of when Joseph was sold as a slave, how come Jacob didn't know? We're talking about the chariot. The man who could see time, space, and motion, past, present, and future, as all in one. There was no such thing as time, space, and motion. In other words, wherever Joseph was, he was. Nothing could escape. The only time someone can hide from you is because you are within the confines of the limitation called time, space, and motion. If someone hides in another room, and time, space, and motion is a credible limitation for the individual, and therefore he doesn't know of the existence. But Jacob being in that kind of realm of beyond time, space, and motion, how come he didn't know? And the answer is, at that particular time, in time, his consciousness, which was above time, space, and motion, was removed. He was removed. That consciousness was taken away from him during that period in time. That evening. What's that?
His ability to see him was removed.
That's correct.
And her too.
That's right.
For the purpose of free will.
That's right. Because certainly, that's how, that would answer many a time the Kabbalists of past. I don't know if they had the stock market during the time of the Ari. I don't think so. But, they could always see the future. I mean, why would Rabbi Chaim Vital or Rabbi Shmuel Vital say, I'm poor and my eyes are failing, but I feel I must get the writings of the Ari out? I mean, what's the matter? He couldn't with his vision manipulate a couple of deals and make a small fortune in no time, right? Why did they all have the Ari was rich? Maybe he knew how to do it, but usually all Kabbalists could really do that. So why didn't they get rich? Why did Chaim Vital at the end have to say I'm poor, and he even says being poor is one of the worst curses. I mean, so he couldn't get rich. The answer is because under certain conditions, certain things must occur. Now, if Chaim Vital and Shmuel Vital were not in that condition of being poor, the Kitvei Ari could never have appeared in the form it appeared. The same way as when Rabbi Shimon came out of the cave and his father-in-laws, and Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair saw him and said, oh my, how, flesh almost all gone, and his physical condition so deteriorated because of 12 years in a cave and also being buried in sand. He says, only because of the way you see me was I in a position, or was I capable of achieving that consciousness of receiving the Zohar. So that's no question. That's the way they would answer. At certain times, a certain portion of the cassette must play itself out, and there must be no intervention. While Jacob could have intervened and said, look, I know Joseph is alive, come on, bring him back. Right? There was a certain play that had to be enacted, and that was the Jews ultimately going down to Egypt. And that's when Jacob understood it, because when he found out that Joseph was alive, why did he tell Joseph to come back? Come on, we got to be in Israel. I mean, what about this business that the Jews had, which we raised the question before? Jews have to go down to the land of Egypt, and then when they come out of Egypt, then they're going to capture the land of Israel. Let them all remain there. Do their thing. But certain things have to take place where the Kabbalist or Jacob or any of the other chariots were not permitted to interfere with the events as they were enacted.
It seems that the chariots also had a tikkun to fulfill.
No. That does not mean they had a tikkun to fill. They were just part of this motion picture that was being enacted, and they were part of it, and they had their place. But when their position could interfere with the rest of the cosmic event that was unfolding, then they would have to be placed into that position where they would not interfere.
They could not see or anything.
Well, that's what I mean, where they wouldn't interfere, meaning they could not see the events from beginning to end, as they normally could. All right?
So then, like that free will therefore taken away from him?
It's not a question of free will. What was taken away, that advanced level of consciousness, was taken. We wouldn't say taken away, but in other words, for them it was not operable. It was, again, placed in an animated suspension state where they could not make use of it.
When it's taken away, then they do have free will. Because when they
Therefore, I
got
said they
foresight-
had no tikkun, so there was not really anything else that.
No, but in other words, when they have the foresight, there's no free will.
When they
see
have
got
when
into-
they have that kind of consciousness, there is absolutely no free will. That's right,
When
totally
they're blinded,
rebuttal.
then they have free will to play with.
Even then, for them in particular, there was no.
Who caused the blindness?
What's that?
Where did the blindness come from? Who caused it? Who?
It's
No, this was part of the cosmic event, the cosmic unfolding of a picture, of a series of events that Jacob seeing Joseph alive would interfere with the events that had to
It
unfold.
seems like it's always at the level of CMP.
Always.
Those were revelations taking place at the point.
Well, let's not say Zerampin. Let's say any level that is above the low level of where most people are found. Even Pharaoh. Pharaoh was not a low level of consciousness. Pharaoh could reach up and knew all of Elohim, right? Knew all of it. The only thing he could not connect with was the Tetragrammaton. Therefore, with this power of Pharaoh, he controlled the entire world at that time. So I just didn't want to say Zeir Anpin because the
reason why I say Zeir Anpin, because Zeir Anpin has the lack of light. It's always pinpoint. If you will see it in the point view of light, it's always reaching a point of V, where there's a minimum amount of light, and only then there's the revelation of the point of Ochosei Malchut. And it seems like in every point that we're mentioning, you always say we should be in two places at the same time, which is all beautiful, but it always really ends up to be at the point of only one point, the one place at the same time. In other words, Am Yisrael ended up in Galut, and that was a point of lack, because they had to go through there to experience the lack, and then only they would be worthy to go to Israel. And in every situation where we mention
but I think, I mean, I maybe understand what you're trying to say. I'm not sure everyone else knows what you're saying.
I'm trying to.
I can read into your words maybe, and you would be correct. But
when I say something, I heard it was written Yaakov ve'en le'inachel. You understand? After Joseph was taken, me'en le'inachel. He didn't. You understand me? And this means that somewhere he knew that he didn't die, because when someone is dead, you reconcile after some time.
oh no, that it does not have to be. There's something else that is said about that. But the fact on that level, there are certain people that never recover from a loss. Oh, that would not be a proper statement. I mean, others would say it's not correct, and because they know of somebody who never recovered, and therefore, this is not what we want to teach here, right? What is said here, tomorrow I have no fears when the Ari says what he said, that tomorrow someone isn't coming around and say, but I know of a situation that exactly contradicts. So we'll try to keep to the Ari, and on a very simple level. All right? So, okay, all right. We're ready for our break. I just want to, and therefore, about God, it says the same thing. Vatikach et zilpa shivkata, also there here in chapter 30, where Leah did not ask for permission to give Zilpah to as a wife for Jacob, and therefore. He thought Ve'via ota esel Yaakov, and Leah brought Zilpah to Yaakov. V'haya savur. Do you imagine? You'll all be shocked at what the Ari is going to say now. V'haya savur shehi Leah. Again, man makes the same mistake twice. I mean, how often, This is what the Ari says. V'haya savur shehi Leah. He thought it was Leah, and this davek. Ima ba'ota alayla, or ba'gad shalom midat. And from this conception appeared God, and that was also shalom midat, without the consciousness of Yaakov. Al ken kara shemo bagad chased alav shisod hadat. Okay, we'll leave that. All right.